Welcome back to Radio Rothbard. I'm Ryan McMaken, executive editor with the Mises Institute. And today we're going to talk about money and whether other things that we're being told are money are in fact money. And could they become money? I speak, of course, about things like Bitcoin and gold. And just in general, we're going to talk about what makes money and what could become money. And to do that, I've got here Per Bylund. He is an economist. He is a senior fellow at the Mises Institute and associate professor of entrepreneurship at the School of Business at Oklahoma State University. And Per knows a lot about money, and I was especially interested. I mean, I don't know how much he has, but I know he knows things about it. That's an old Ludwig von Mises joke, was him telling his wife when they were young that he would write a lot about money, but he wouldn't ever have any. So sometimes I make that joke about myself. I don't know if that applies to others. However, we are going to talk about money and the theory related to money and Austrian economics and money. And so I brought Per on because he wrote a recent article on this topic called... It's really a Austrian guide for Bitcoiners. It really just covers some of the basic premises of money and what money is, and it really addresses the issue of if Bitcoin could become money. But of course, this relates to other things too that might become money, because I get comments from readers fairly frequently saying, now if they're pro-gold people, they're saying, well, why aren't you talking about gold and saying that gold is money? And then I hear similar things from the Bitcoin people. So I want to just talk about some of those details here today and what's unique about Austrian economics in terms of our view of money and what makes us special in terms of our better insights into understanding money. So, Per, thank you for coming. And I really just want to start off by asking you just the real basic version of what is money.
Hey, thanks for having me. Money defined is just a commonly accepted medium of exchange. So, I mean, it's that general good of some kind that we use in order to facilitate exchanges. So therefore, it is used as a sort of a measuring rod, if you will, for prices, because all prices are denominated in or constituted in money, as Mises put it. But there's nothing more to it, really. That's the definition. And then it's unfortunate that the definition itself is subject to a lot of debate, which is sort of strange, and it's a little bit silly to discuss and argue for and against different definitions. But in Austrian economics I would say in economics in general, it is the commonly used medium of exchange.
And really, though, I mean, that sounds easy, but what is a medium of exchange then? And so I think we can get into that in a little bit more detail. If someone asked you, though, what is it that sets Austrians apart from other economists and just other people who are well-versed in the topic, is there something about Austrian economics that you think provides a better understanding then of money? And what should we look to in terms of why is our definition better? I think is the question, right? Just arguing in terms of, well, I don't like your definition, but I mean, presumably a better definition would reflect reality more. So why is our definition better?
Yeah, true. And a good definition in economics is something that defines the function something has. Because in economics, we want to understand what are the function of different things and what are the causalities between them. So what leads to what? So, I mean, defining money as that's what the government says we should use, that doesn't really provide us with a function at all. It doesn't explain anything at all. Because whether we use it or not, that's what matters, not what the government says, right? So money, being the commonly used medium of exchange, therefore has all these different functions in the economy. And then we can use the concept of money to explain a lot of things. And therefore we can have, like Mises talked about, the economic calculation, and we can have production structures, and we can have a division of labor where people specialize into quite advanced, really narrowly defined tasks and trade with each other, and long supply chains and things like that. And all of those things really depend on having a money in terms of having something that you exchange your productions against. And so it's not in mainstream economics. You learn that money is this thing that they agree with our definition that it is a medium of exchange, but then they add a bunch of qualities as well. So it should be fungible, and it should be easy to divide, easily divisible, and it should have all this other. It should be a unit of account, and it should be all these other things. But those are really how money tends to be used, and it's not the function itself. Usually a money will have those functions in the economy because it is a money, but derived functions is not the definition of something. Just because something is a money doesn't mean that it has to be easily divisible, for instance. That doesn't really follow.
Well, I mean, I think the function of it then and its status as a medium of exchange, right, brings us to the issue of what is money in our daily life? That is, give me an example, right? And as I just noted, I've got people who are telling me that the only real money is gold, or people telling me that Bitcoin is better money than the dollar. And so, like, just looking really at what we're looking at in the here and now, moving away from theory a little bit, looking at some of these proposed alternatives to the dollar. I think we could say that the dollar is money. Clearly, people use it that way. But I guess the question is, are gold and Bitcoin money? And if not, why not? Because don't people use them as a medium of exchange, at least sometimes? I mean, and what do they have to do to become money if they aren't money now?
Right. A lot of things are media of exchange. So, I mean, we can use anything really as a medium of exchange between the two of us, or within our family, or in the neighborhood, or between just autistic libertarians online, or whatever group you want, right? It doesn't really matter. But a money doesn't really have the function in the economy itself, as we study in economics, unless it is the commonly accepted one. Because if you and I choose to use bananas as a medium of exchange, that doesn't really affect anything at all except for the two of us. But we can't use bananas as media of exchange with someone else, because they're just going to go, why would I accept bananas? Are you an idiot? They would rather have dollars or gold or whatever. So, I mean, economics is always situational in the sense that we're looking at how the economic system functions. And that means that there's an extent of the market, as Adam Smith put it, and that is how far your trades and exchanges sort of reach in the economic landscape. And that's where money as the generally accepted medium of exchange in that landscape has a specific function that other media of exchange do not have. But I mean, a lot of people use this definition sort of dishonestly, and they say, well, it's universal or generally accepted. Well, if you go to France, you can't use dollars anymore. Well, I mean, that's true, but you have to use their money because you're in a different context. You're in a different situation. And there can be many different monies. And I mean, to your question, is Bitcoin money, is gold money? Well, in certain circles, it can be. So among Bitcoiners, if they choose to not use dollars whatsoever, therefore they also exclude a lot of different types of trades, and they also cannot work for a lot of employers and things like that, right? Because they refuse to get paid in anything but Bitcoin. Then in those circles, then Bitcoin would be a money. But it doesn't mean that in the economy overall, and most people aren't Bitcoiners like that. In the economy overall, the dollar is still money, whether we like it or not. That doesn't really matter. And the same thing with gold. It might be a medium of exchange between central banks, which it tends to be, but it's not the medium of exchange or the generally accepted medium of exchange between regular people. You don't go to the supermarket and you pay your groceries with gold coins or with Bitcoin.
Yeah, you make a comment in your article saying that basically it's not money if you have to look around and search for someone who's going to accept it. in exchange for goods and services, just because by definition, right, a commonly accepted medium of exchange would be commonly accepted. And even those of us who think that owning some gold and silver is a good idea, I know that if I just go down to the store and I try and start buying stuff with it, I'm going to have to enter into a whole negotiation about it. And I mean, that could take hours. Who knows? And in the end, the person may not even accept it. Because then I'm kind of proving my point then that if I give that person gold or silver, they're going to have to go and negotiate with the next person. And you're going to have to add a premium, right? Or a discount, I guess, depending on how you look at it, to the use of this thing, because it's just not nearly commonly accepted enough. And so when people do tell me, well, gold is the only real money, that only fits their idiosyncratic definition that they usually have, because it's clearly not a commonly accepted medium of exchange. And even though I'm often told from people that I apply a different standard to gold, that the Mises Institute is too pro-gold and not enough pro-Bitcoin, I don't know. I think we apply pretty much the same standard here, which is that gold isn't money right now in our society. It has been in the past, where you could go pretty much anywhere and people would accept it. And who knows what the future holds. And I think we would say the same thing about Bitcoin, is who knows what the future holds. And especially, it seems to me that it's up to people beyond me for making that decision, right? Isn't whether I can't decide if Bitcoin or gold is going to be money. That's going to have to be on the choices of hundreds of millions, potentially billions of other people for making that decision in mass, right?
Yeah, and that's sort of the contradiction also with what some Bitcoiners claim. And I've been told that there are a lot of Bitcoiners who don't claim this, but I've also encountered hundreds of Bitcoiners who are hodlers, right? So you hold on for dear life. So you buy Bitcoin, but you never ever freaking use it because it's going to become money and therefore it's going to be worth a ton. So just buy Bitcoin and hold it. Don't ever use it. You can use it as collateral to get loans and stuff and get dollars, but don't ever trade it. Well, how is it going to become the generally accepted medium of exchange if you don't actually use it as a medium of exchange? That's a contradiction, right? And I claimed this on X a couple of times, and of course I get all these hundreds, if not thousands, of people attacking me that this is false. And I think it's instructive in a sense because the debate has sort of shifted. In the beginning, Austrian economics, of course, is fully compatible with Bitcoin. And I mean, Bitcoiners should use Austrian economics to understand what they need to do to make Bitcoin into a money. Let's put it that way. And in the beginning, they were frustrated that Austrians would not say that Bitcoin is a money. So just like you said, it's not the generally accepted medium of exchange. And now some people say, well, it is for me. Well, okay, fine, good for you. But it's not for me, and it's not for the grocer or my the guy, the lawn mowing guy and whatever. They don't accept Bitcoin, or maybe they would if I would chat with them for a little bit and help them set it up and whatever. But it's not a money in that sense, right? So they were frustrated with the definition that Bitcoin was not money yet. Now they're rather claiming that, well, Bitcoin is a store of value, which is a quality of monies according to mainstream textbooks. And as a store of value, it is therefore a money, and therefore you should hold it, because if you hold a store of money that becomes a medium of exchange, it's going to increase in value a lot, and therefore you're all going to be rich. Which is sort of, it's placing the cart before the horse, like both theoretically and practically. It's just, it's very frustrating, these discussions, because they really, the core of it is really just, let's change the definition. Let's criticize the definition because it doesn't fit with the reality I want to see. And that's not really the role of the theory.
Well, and lots of things are a store of value. I mean, real estate's a store of value. I can put money in there and can sit there for a long time, and I'm probably going to be a lot better off after a while. Same with stocks. But that doesn't make those things money, it would seem to me. And as you say, right, it's not a value judgment. I'm not saying that it shouldn't be money just because right now it's not commonly accepted enough to meet the definition. Fine. I mean, I'm not stating what I think ought to be the situation. And I don't see how it would be. I'm not a gold trader, right? I don't make a living from dissing Bitcoin. So it makes no difference to me. If it does become money, fine. I don't see a problem. But I guess just some people are very attached to it. Maybe some people who are Bitcoin traders are somehow involved in that. Their livelihood is tied to it. And so just as the same with that, if I see someone who's a gold trader and denouncing Bitcoin as necessarily a scam at all times, I take into account the fact that this person wants people buying and selling gold because that makes them better off. That's just something to consider. But we're just trying to provide a descriptive situation here. And looking, though, at how does money become money, you'll see a phrase come up every now and then, which is the regression theorem. And I know the first time I saw this years ago, I thought it was a reference to like regression in statistics, like a regression line, but apparently it has nothing to do with that at all. So maybe you can tell us what the regression theorem is and how it's relevant to what we're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. So the problem with money is that typically throughout history, it has been a good in itself. So I mean, like I mentioned, if we use bananas, you and I and other people start using bananas are going to be the money, but bananas are good too. So how do we separate those? How do we figure out what is the value of money as a money versus what is the value of the money good as a good? And that is, of course, the value of it as money is the purchasing power of it, to put it that way, right? So we use dollars today or bananas based on the prices we have just recently seen. So we understand that, well, I should be able to buy this much of that good and this much of that good. So I get a pound of ground beef for 3 bananas or whatever, those sort of things. So we use recent history, observed empirical history, to get an appreciation for what the purchasing power of the money is. And that, of course, raises the question, okay, but where do those prices come from? And why was money valued that before? Well, that was in turn based on the same thing. People had made observations in the recent past, or in sort of the present, if you will, and based on that, they choose to hold certain amounts of money, and they have certain expectations of prices. And then Mises went back all the way to where there was no money. So there was only a barter society. And in that barter society, well, then the money good was just a good like any other good. And that is the value of the good as a good. But then, of course, the more it's being used as a medium of exchange, the greater the demand for it. Because everybody starts selling whatever it is they're producing for the money good rather than trying to barter with someone for something they truly want. So I sell my entrepreneurship lectures to you for bananas, even though I don't like bananas, but I can use the bananas to buy something else. So, of course, then the demand for bananas has increased. And when it is a generally accepted medium of exchange, then everybody will trade their labor and their stuff for that medium of exchange. And that, of course, means that there's enormous demand for it, way beyond the good itself. And that's what the regression theorem proves, that there's a good to start with of some value, but the good as a money has value as money. So it's not a circular argument that money is money because it's money. It's actually, yes, it's based off of the recent past, which then goes all the way back to where there was no demand for the good as a money, was only demand for the good as a good.
So in order for something new to become money then, does it have to be valued? Like, what goods are we going to value it in? I suppose it could start completely from scratch, and that I'm thinking in terms of Bitcoin or gold in terms of the number of bananas it will buy. But could it also do that based on dollars? I'm thinking of this new money in terms of the numbers of dollars it would buy, and then I can somehow piggyback on the regression of dollars going way back, right? Because dollars, I suppose, are based on, right? They don't go back 1,000 years in time. They're a new money that arose based on gold and a variety of other sorts of evaluations. So could anything then crop up at any given time and establish this connection to previous monies, and then the regression theorem applies in those cases?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, look at the fiat dollar that we have today. It's not really backed by anything at all, except for maybe the government's guns. But it really does piggyback on the gold dollar, the way it was before. And yes, they stopped denominating it in gold, and they sort of separated gold from the dollar. But people kept on using it for the simple reason that they kept trusting the dollar as a currency, even though it was not backed by gold anymore. Of course, that also means that since you can't go to the bank and claim gold for it anymore, it can fluctuate, and it does fluctuate a whole lot more because there's no such basis. It's purely subjective in a sense, right? Rather than having a objective base in a good. That good, of course, too, is also subjectively valued, but it is a thing that has some sort of use. So I think anything can really take over and become a new money. And I think that we've seen this in many situations. And the fiat dollar following the gold dollar is one, but in any country moving from one currency to the next, the European countries moving from their national currencies to the euro, there are examples of that. And I mean, they try whatever they can to connect the new currency to the previous monies in order to legitimize and justify the value of the new money, right? So the euro, or the European currency unit, the ECU, in the beginning was based on whatever number of Deutschmarks and French francs and what have you in a fixed exchange rate. And they kept that side by side for a while before they said, okay, now we're skipping the national currencies and we're just using the euro. And they could continue doing that because people were sort of used to it, and they had already accepted it as a full equivalent in terms of currency with their previous national currency. So absolutely you can do that.
And it would just seem that it is a long process that has to take place. And it also seems we're talking about a lot of like behavioral issues, psychology, sociology, these sorts of things that go beyond just simple economics. And a lot of that just strikes me as pretty unpredictable as well in terms of figuring out, okay, what's going to be money 500 years from now? I mean, I have no idea. And even if governments say this is money, right, even that has its limits because the value of the money can go to zero. So what happens in those cases, right, where even if the government is legally saying that this is money and this is what you should do, but the value goes down so significantly that people don't want to use it anymore? Is there what is that in-between period where the money that's been popular for a long time through something other, because a lot of the examples we just talked about were like the euro, right? The transition from the Deutschmark to a euro, which is very much a government-guided process. Are there examples we can look to in terms of, because this is what I hear from Bitcoin people all the time, and gold people as well, is that, well, the dollar's value is going to disappear and then everyone's going to turn toward whatever it is I'm promoting as the next money. So what is the psychology that happens in those places? Because the government is going to want you to use money X, but people are going to then start moving toward this other money in many other cases because money X is going to lose its value. But that is so unpredictable as to how long that's going to take or how that process is going to play out. I mean, what's an example of that where an entirely new money was ushered in that wasn't government guided? Does such an example in the modern world exist? I have no doubt that we could go back far enough to find that. But is there any situation we point to where it went from publicly directed and owned money to some sort of private situation?
Well, I think we're seeing that sort of in every example of hyperinflation. Because in hyperinflation, what you have is exactly what you're talking about, that people's perception of the money, is that, well, this is not going to keep its purchasing power, and everybody starts believing that this is not going to keep its purchasing power, so I don't want the money anymore because it just loses value. So everybody's trying to get rid of it and get something else. And in the beginning, they just return to anything that is worth anything, so any type of good. But very often, you would have people resorting to certain things to trade, if it's canned goods or something like that. But I mean, the classical example would be the prison, where the prisoners started using cigarettes as currency, started denominating every trade in terms of cigarettes. And it's not because all the inmates loved to smoke. I mean, many of them did not smoke. That's not the issue. The issue is that those were things that were at hand, which is, I mean, it's very limited if you're in a prison, of course, and something that people used, and they figured that they could trade them on even if they didn't want the cigarettes themselves. So we have many examples of this, I think. I think the issue here is the inertia, right? That when the government, yes, it provides the currency and tells us to use the currency, and it also inflates like hell because it benefits them at our expense. And that doesn't cause inflation right away, simply because, well, we have expectations on the purchasing power of the money, so things don't change. But then they start changing, and then it's really hard to stop it because we have already learned that this currency is losing its value. And that's why very often a government can, or a banking system can, inflate the currency quite a bit, and then suddenly it seems it turns into hyperinflation. And then in looking at the statistics, everybody's confused and go, what caused this, right? But what caused it was that over an extensive period, you had printed a ton of money, and that has affected people's perception of the money. They don't trust it anymore, so they shun the money. And when that happens, all the prices just go through the roof in that money because people are not, they don't want the money anymore. So that's why it seems to happen so suddenly. And first there's nothing, right? And then suddenly everything just hits the fan. And this is something we've seen in every hyperinflation period, I think. And the problem there is trying to stop it because people have lost their trust in that currency, but also probably the issuer of that currency. So the same central bank can't easily, or at least not easily, say that, well, okay, we're going to have the same currency, we're just going to strike a few zeros from all the bills. I mean, they do that, but the problem is that, well, people know that the money is coming from the same person, the same agency, the same bank. So what is really different? Do they trust what those bankers or central bankers are saying, that, oh, we won't inflate anymore? If they trust them, then it's fine. Then that can actually work. But if they don't trust them, it doesn't really matter if they say that, well, this new currency is based in gold. If people don't trust that, then that's not going to work either.
Well, and I suppose in an odd way, using dollars is in certain contexts a type of privatization, in the sense of it's taking power away from the local regime, right? So think about Zimbabwe, where the money just completely disappeared in its terms of value. And nobody wanted the local currency anymore, so everybody wanted dollars for the most part. And even though the dollar, of course, is not a private currency in the United States, it's controlled by the regime, and even globally, really, there's a lot of regime controls that go under the dollar there. I guess you could say that was at the local level a movement away from regime control, and in a certain way a privatization of money. Depending on how rigorously you want to define that. And I suppose a similar thing was discussed for Argentina, right? Where it goes to what you were just saying. We don't trust, we kept having to chop zeros off our currency because it kept devaluing so much. People don't trust the central bank anymore. People are sick of the constant inflation and the constant robbery of their wealth through the monetary and price inflation. So we want something else, something that's outside the control of our local central bank. So they start talking about dollarization, right? We're going to start using the dollar. I suppose in a certain context, that's privatization, but certainly not on a global level. And so it's an interesting case. And I guess the same principles apply then, right? That is a transition from one currency to another based on a loss of faith in one currency and a move over to another currency that is not necessarily endorsed by the government in that case. I mean, is that a workable example there, you think, in that case?
Yeah, I think so. It works the other way around too. I mean, the euro was introduced piggybacking on the strong reputation of the Germans, because they had a really strong currency for a very long time, right? And they were suffering, according to mainstreamers, because of deflation and whatever else, right? Because the Deutschmark was so strong, and therefore they made sure to position the euro so that it was, well, the Germans will have a lot of control over the central bank of Europe, and therefore it will be a valuable currency, and it will be not deflationary, but almost, and it will not be like the Italians would have it or anything like that, right? So therefore you can trust this. So I mean, it works both ways, but ultimately it is a matter of trust, especially something that is unbacked, like all the fiat currencies. So there's no, and I mean, the problem there is, using the regression theorem again, if people lose trust in that good as a money, well, then it will fall back to its value as a good. But a dollar or a euro, it doesn't really have a value at all as a good. So it can fall down to zero. And it can fall really quickly if people lose trust in it. But a troy ounce of gold, it will, if people lose trust in gold for some reason, they will not lose trust in gold in its industrial use. It can still be used for all of those things, which means it will lose its value as money, but it will fall back to its use for industrial purposes. So it will not fall down to zero.
Well, and contra the claims that gold has always been the most popular money, is we can look at historical periods where actually it was silver that was traded much more often and was more available. And I've done a couple of articles on just the history of the different uses of bimetallism, essentially. And that in East Asia, for example, silver was the overriding preferred metal. It was clearly the more commonly traded medium of exchange in that case. But they wouldn't refuse your gold if you gave it to them, because it did have some worth. It probably, you needed to put some sort of discount on it, in the sense that it wasn't as easily traded because their institutions weren't formed around that particular metal. But you can just imagine going to them and saying, hey, here's a bunch of pieces of paper that, trust me, they have some value somewhere. That would be a much harder sell than saying, hey, here's some heavy metal that you've probably seen before and have some sense of how it could be used. That is a very different situation. But one thing that I try to impress on people, and this kind of takes us to our last question, is the issue of, heck, if it's seashells, if it's pieces of paper, I don't have like a moral position on it, in the sense of the market can choose what sort of money it wishes to use. If the market, all of these different people working in the marketplace, determine that something that I personally can't see how this could have any value, but they decide that that's what everybody's going to trade in, well, then that's money now. And so I don't say what should be money in the future, right? I don't say it should be gold. I don't say it should be Bitcoin. I say let the market decide. But the caveat there always is, what we do think ought to be the case, and what should be happening, is that we should be moving toward private money of some kind, that it truly should be the market on its own that determines what is money, rather than some sort of government fiat, government regulation, government saying, well, we'll only accept your payment for taxes in this sort of money. And so governments then can do a lot to make sure that their preferred money is used as the money. But what we keep coming back to here is, like the examples you cite in terms of hyperinflation, those all seem to be related to government money. Governments have come down and they said, okay, we want this paper to be money. And we don't make any promises in terms of what it's backed by. And of course, governments always just at the snap of a finger just decide, oh, this money's not backed by anything anymore. We've just decided unilaterally. And so when we talk about, yeah, we think private money is better, what are the benefits of private money as opposed to government sanctioned, government forced money? I mean, don't we need a central bank to tell us what the money is? Or would we all be better off if it was some sort of private money instead, regardless of whether it was gold or Bitcoin or something else?
Well, a central bank is great for propping up the banking system and not keeping them accountable for what they do, right? So if you have a private money regime, if you will, then any bank can issue their own currency and their own money. But if people don't trust it, then you have this phenomenon of bank runs. The people immediately go there and they want to withdraw their deposits in something real, which historically was gold or silver. And then if that bank had issued more notes than they actually had backing for, then they would go bankrupt because they would run out of that gold or silver. And it was enough for there to be just basically gossip or rumor that they were issuing too much. And then people could go there. And that's the failure of that one bank, right? And that keeps that bank in check. And any other bank could suffer from this. Today, what we have is a central bank that is usually the government's, whether it's independent or not. And all the banks, they issue currency on behalf of the central bank. And if they run out, if there is sort of a bank run, then they just go to the central bank. And the central bank goes, oh, no problem, I'll just give you more bills, basically, right? I'll give you more money. So it doesn't matter if you behave or misbehave as a bank, or rather, you have an incentive to misbehave because that's how you make money. If you behave like a real bank, then you're going to lose money. You're probably going to lose the business competition of it, just because you're a crook, really, in terms of banking. So definitely better with private money. I think in what we're seeing now, though, is a push by central banks to get rid of money altogether through the CBDCs, the central bank digital currencies, which is not really a money according to our definition, which is where we started the discussion, right? It's a generally accepted medium of exchange. What they're suggesting with the CBDCs, not that it's a medium of exchange, it's really a central ledger that gives you purchasing power. So you're not exchanging anything, you're just updating the ledger. Which means, of course, that you have abolished money completely. So you're not exchanging anymore. You're just being provided with purchasing power by the omnipotent government. And then they can, of course, provide their friends or whoever behaves with more purchasing power, and they can decide what it can be used for and all this other stuff, right? So they're pushing for a non-money future for the simple reason that money is a bottom-up phenomenon. It's an institution in that sense, right? That we adopt it as market actors, and even though they control the currency, it's still a problem for the ruling elite because they still need to have and provide us with the medium of exchange. And the medium of exchange, the nature of it is that we can choose what to exchange for. So we can choose whether we exchange our stuff for this, and we can use how we use it in exchange. Well, that's not fully controllable. But if you get rid of that and instead replace it with a central ledger as a sort of unit of account and nothing else, then you don't have price fluctuations, you don't have market prices anymore. You can just distribute goods the way you see fit, which is pure control, really.
Well, so just when we think we might have some new options in terms of private money coming online, either in the medium or long term maybe, then the central banks come up with a brilliant new idea of getting rid of decentralized money and really just money in the pure sense altogether. So it seems that the stakes are rather kind of high when it comes to central bank digital currencies. Now, before we go, I mean, I'm really glad you brought this up. Because I think one question that people often have is, what is the difference between them just saying that we're not going to print up physical bills anymore we're just going to have electronic money. It's still the dollar. We're just not going to print up physical money anymore. But you could trade that as you want. Is there a distinction between that and a central bank digital currency then? What is the important distinction?
Well, it's a matter of how you can use it. So, I mean, it's really a matter of controlling its use. And I agree that it might not in practice be a big step, because you already have the technology there and you have the ability to control these things. But on principle, if it is a money and a medium of exchange, then yes, it might be on whatever database somewhere, but you choose how to use it and for whom, with whom to exchange and for what and things like that, right? And how much of this currency you want to earn by supplying and providing the market with services and goods and what have you. Whereas what they're talking about is a fully programmable and programmed currency in which your money can disappear because they want it to, and they can also say that, well, you can't use this in exchange for everything. So you've had to drink too many this week, so you can't drink anything at all for a month. So you can't buy anything with alcohol because they can sort of restrict the use of that money. Well, that's just directing your purchases, which is giving you the power, so to speak, to buy certain goods. They can also say that, hey, Ryan, you're a little bit too overweight here, so you can only buy 1,200 calories a day. Say, okay, so that's going to make you lose weight unless you find another way of finding calories, right? But if you have a medium exchange, they're going to say, well, you only have this amount of money. Well, whether you buy something that is really dense in terms of calories or not, that's up to you. So in terms of the principle of freedom, it's enormous difference. But in terms of the practice of it, we're getting close to it. And of course, they're going to take advantage of that too, I'm pretty sure.
Well, thank you, Professor Bylund, for joining us today. He has many articles on Mises.org. In fact, I think he has a new one on Tuesday this week. So if you come to our site this week, he'll probably have an article there on the front page. But yeah, check out his archive. Lots of good stuff about money, about entrepreneurship, about a lot of good day-to-day stuff related to government regulation as well. So I certainly recommend his work. And again, a senior fellow at the Mises Institute and a professor of entrepreneurship at Oklahoma State University. So thank you again for joining us. Thank you everyone out there for listening. We will be back next week with more. So we'll see you next time. One last thing, Radio Rothbard fans. Before you go, I want to make sure you know about our April 26th event in Phoenix, Arizona. And this one's called Our Enemy, the Bureaucracy. This one features Dr. Robert Malone, Tom Woods, and Tom DiLorenzo as they discuss the psychological operations and bureaucratic control, the madness of COVID-era public health, and the corruption and hypocrisy of our federal bureaucracy. Tickets are $100 for Mises members and $120 for non-members. You can register now at Mises.org/Phoenix25, and you have a chance to win a free ticket to the event if you enter the raffle at Mises.org/PhoenixRaffle25 by April 1st.